Hey everyone, I'm back with another video, and today we're going to be looking at someone's video on why Tears of the Kingdom sucks, apparently. Now, if you don't like the game, there's really nothing wrong with that. I can understand why some people might not like Tears of the Kingdom, or even Breath of the Wild, or even Zelda in general for that matter. But the reasons this guy lists don't really make a lot of sense, and I'm not sure if it's because he doesn't explain it well, or if it's because he just can't really appreciate certain things about it, which he does say he appreciates Tears of the Kingdom as a game, but doesn't like it. But he doesn't have very good reasons of why he doesn't like Tears of the Kingdom, so let's get straight into this.
Okay. The other day, I made the decision to drop Tears of the Kingdom, and rather, I started a brand new from scratch file of Breath of the Wild. I want to express to you how much more fun I had playing the prologue of Breath of the Wild again. Something I've already done, a tutorial prologue again. How much more fun I had doing that than playing any of Tears of the Kingdom.
I don't understand why you would have more fun playing a tutorial you've already played through than an entire game. Like, don't get me wrong, Breath of the Wild tutorial is pretty ingenious when you really look at it and think about it, because it does a really good job at teaching you the game's mechanics and naturally guiding the player without all these pop-ups and tutorials that are just walls of text. I really appreciate Breath of the Wild for that, but that doesn't really mean it's more fun than the entirety of Tears of the Kingdom. And once again, having fun is subjective. Some people have fun murdering people, but that doesn't mean it's objectively fun, you know?
And I was originally thinking about writing an essay on this topic, but I feel like it's more from the heart, free form. I prefer just talking face to my own face in this camera about my opinions, but I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't like Tears of the Kingdom. And this is coming off of someone whose favorite game of all time is Breath of the Wild.
So I don't really understand this. If Breath of the Wild is your favorite game of all time, as it is mine, wouldn't you like Tears of the Kingdom? Because it's basically just Breath of the Wild on steroids. It took everything Breath of the Wild did and expanded upon it tenfold. And on an objective level, Tears of the Kingdom is less flawed than Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom addressed pretty much every major criticism of Breath of the Wild. There's more combat options, more enemy variety, more places to explore, weapon durability isn't as annoying. So many of the flaws Breath of the Wild had were basically resolved in Tears of the Kingdom. And they're both incredibly similar games too, to where why wouldn't you just like Tears of the Kingdom over Breath of the Wild, or at least understand that Tears of the Kingdom is an objectively better game than Breath of the Wild. And Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time, but I can admit that the game has some pretty big flaws, and that most of those flaws were addressed in Tears of the Kingdom, and Tears of the Kingdom is pretty much a better game than Breath of the Wild, even though I enjoyed Breath of the Wild a little bit more, not because I think it's a better game, but just because it felt so new at the time, and the novelty kind of wore off with Tears of the Kingdom. But I guess I'd say that they're tied for my favorite game of all time.
Now, I think, just as what happened with Skyward Sword, where initially everyone said Skyward Sword was a masterpiece, and then community consensus came around and realized it's a heavily flawed game, I think the same thing will happen to Tears of the Kingdom. And I've seen some critiques and discourse around it that's starting to lean toward it's pretty flawed, not great game, but I feel like the consensus hasn't made that shift yet, and I'm just gonna add my voice to this shift and see if see what happens.
No, the general consensus isn't going to change on Tears of the Kingdom. The reason it changed for Skyward Sword is because people realized it basically removed everything people liked about Zelda games, made everything too linear, it went in too hard on the motion control gimmick when people just wanted a typical Zelda game. And if people didn't change their minds on liking Breath of the Wild, they won't on Tears of the Kingdom, because they both use the exact same formula. So I don't really know why you think that Tears of the Kingdom will eventually be regarded as a bad game eventually. And like I said, you don't have to like Tears of the Kingdom. But if you say that the general consensus is going to change, that kind of implies that you think it's an objectively bad game, which it isn't. Not in the slightest.
So, Tears of the Kingdom is an incredibly impressive game. Do not get me wrong. There is so much love, time, and effort put into Tears of the Kingdom, and I'd be lying if I said that wasn't the case. There are, incredibly great characters and character designs. There's an incredible soundtrack. There are 3 overworlds. It's open world, and there are 3 worlds that that are equal in size. That is absolutely insane and tremendous.
Yeah, it is a pretty impressive game, but I would argue that the depths and the Sky Islands aren't really that great compared to the overworld, but I get what he's saying. But if he thinks it's an impressive game, then why does he think the general consensus will change over time? I'm kind of confused on that.
And an incredible feat from Nintendo. So I'd be lying if I didn't praise what deserves praise in Tears of the Kingdom. The visuals are stunning, as were in Breath of the Wild, but it's a little bit improved. But yeah. So, all's to say, that's the good. The majority is bad.
No, not in the slightest. I would argue that Tears of the Kingdom has less flaws than Breath of the Wild, and it does what Breath of the Wild did, but better in every way, pretty much. I already listed some reasons why Tears of the Kingdom is better, so I'm not going to go over that again, but yeah, just know that the only things I think Breath of the Wild did than Tears of the Kingdom was, for one thing, it was a new concept for a Zelda game. It felt fresh and new, whereas Tears of the Kingdom, the novelty kind of wears off. And I think the Divine Beasts were a little bit more enjoyable than the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. But that's pretty much it. And I might even be wrong on the Divine Beasts being better, because I know some people prefer the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom, but personally I prefer the Divine Beasts. But yeah, Tears of the Kingdom basically used Breath of the Wild as a foundation for making a better game, which I feel like I'm going to keep repeating this over and over again because of the points he makes.
The story is terrible. Not in the sense of the full narrative. There are some incredible narrative beats, at least from what I've discovered so far, what I've gotten spoiled for me, because I did not finish the game.
Well, for one thing, I think you should at least finish the game before comparing it to Breath of the Wild. And secondly, yeah, the story isn't that great in Tears of the Kingdom, but it wasn't really that great in Breath of the Wild either. I mean, Breath of the Wild did have the better storyline, but not by much, really. Plus, I never really played Zelda for the story. I mean, yeah, it's nice that it's there, and the lore can get pretty interesting sometimes, but mostly I just play Zelda for exploration and adventure, and I don't really care about the story for the most part. Am I alone on this? I mean, most Nintendo games in general you don't play for the story, so...
There are incredible narrative beats. However, they are scattered throughout the game, similarly in Breath of the Wild, but they are told in a non-comprehensible order. They're told in random order, and they're shuffled around, and unlike Breath of the Wild, there's not enough to piece the narrative together.
In Breath of the Wild, the memories were scattered randomly too. I mean, they used the same format as Breath of the Wild for this story. And I think Tears of the Kingdom did a decent job at explaining what happened. Not as well as Breath of the Wild, but you can at least understand what happened. Maybe he feels this way because he didn't finish the game? I don't know, but the story is pretty similar to Breath of the Wild in terms of format and explaining everything.
You will see certain parts of the narrative and the backstory, and all of the narrative takes place in the past, which is another problem. Breath of the Wild, there was narrative in the past and the continuity of that narrative in the present. So you had a narrative in the past that was happening, while also you had this continuation to that story happening in present. The entirety of the narrative in Tears of the Kingdom is in the past.
No, Tears of the Kingdom story is in the past, and then you continue it just like you did in Breath of the Wild. It's literally the exact same format and structure. I just don't understand why it's only a problem when Tears of the Kingdom does this stuff, but it's perfect when it's in Breath of the Wild. No, they're pretty much the same structure in terms of story. They both take place in the past, and then you continue where the past left off. That's pretty much how both games are.
There is no actual story happening until the present, until the end of the game, from what I understand. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is just what I understand, what I've seen so far.
Maybe you should have finished the game before jumping to that conclusion then.
The story is a past thing, and it creates this disconnect because you're just a guy running like you're just someone that was a legend that is running around learning about something that happened to your friend, and you're not a part of this story, is what it feels like. In Breath of the Wild, it felt like you were this character that had so much promise and so much legend, and everyone you loved is gone, and you're just kind of traversing this world and sort of trying to piece back your life together, as well as save the person you loved.
Well, the whole point of the character of Link is that you're supposed to project yourself onto the character. I think you might be reading a little bit too much into it. I mean, Link isn't really a character, he's just a vessel for the player to project themselves on. And in Breath of the Wild, yeah, you have to piece back your life together with the memories. In Tears of the Kingdom, you're supposed to basically piece together what happened in the past that caused the conflict in the first place. And Link already has all his memories back, if the true ending was a canon ending, which it should be. And in Tears of the Kingdom, people know that Link saved the world, basically, and they know him as a hero, and now he has to do it again. They even know him by name this time, and he's not just some guy. So, if anything, in Breath of the Wild, you're just some guy wandering around, because Link doesn't know anything that happened in the past until you get all the memories.
Who you think you still have a chance of saving, even though it's been 100 years. And the knowledge that they're being tortured for 100 years and that you were sleeping during that time, it's heartbreaking, it's crushing. And this goes into the sort of post-apocalyptic nature of Breath of the Wild that I think Tears of the Kingdom kind of counteracts.
Well, yeah, of course Tears of the Kingdom is going to counteract the apocalyptic nature of Breath of the Wild because Calamity Ganon was defeated, so it takes place about 2 years later when they're rebuilding Hyrule and repairing everything that happened after the Great Calamity. Why would it still be post-apocalyptic 2 years after the Calamity was defeated? I don't really understand the point you're making here.
Breath of the Wild is a post-apocalyptic story. The world was established, went to a point of futuristic technology, and then was wiped out, decimated, and now it's just like scattered villages and like little hubs of little like groups of people trying to survive in this monster-ridden, dangerous world. And it's so fascinating, and you can explore and learn about this history and find old artifacts and put puzzle pieces together in your head. And especially like with the Zonai, which I'll get into very soon, the Zonai are this like really deep in the background that you blink and you miss it kind of thing in Breath of the Wild, where it's like, oh wow, there's these like really interesting things scattered around the map of like similar architecture, and it's very Song of Ice and Fire-esque, where in the background there's this like deeper mystery of this like race of people that existed even before the narrative that you know. And like, what was their deal? What are these artifacts? What does this all mean? And it's this really cool mystery that you can theorize about and put together in your head.
Okay, as someone who put over 200 hours in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, were the Zonai even mentioned in Breath of the Wild? Like he said, it's blink and you'll miss it, so maybe I did miss it, but I'm pretty sure the Zonai weren't even mentioned in Breath of the Wild or anywhere to be found or hinted at. Breath of the Wild was all about the ancient Sheikah, and now Tears of the Kingdom is all about the Zonai. Both of these ancient civilizations had their time to shine in each of their respective games. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, because I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to Zelda lore.
But it's just revealed at the beginning of the first 5 minutes of Tears of the Kingdom. It's like, oh, the Zonai, this is what they were. This is the whole narrative now. The Zonai become the main narrative, and it just takes completely away that mystery from Breath of the Wild, and it ruins it. It ruins it. Quite frankly. Like, I'm not going to say what they did with the Zonai was bad, but it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense with what they were trying to do in Breath of the Wild. It's almost like a new creative team looked at the Breath of the Wild. I know it's the same team, but it's like it almost has the feel of if a new creative team looked at the notes from Breath of the Wild and was just like, oh, Zonai, let's make that the plot.
I'm not really sure what to say about this. I mean, sorry your fan theories didn't come true or something, or they didn't leave it a mystery, but maybe they were building up to Zonai in Breath of the Wild, if they were even in the game, which I'm not sure they were.
It just is disappointing, man. You know, when you spent all this time exploring and theorizing and kind of crafting things in your own head of like what this all means, and then the next game is just like, oh, this is what it all means, and everything you like theorized about and thought about is wrong. It's why I don't want them to reveal a lot of the great mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire. I feel like it works better as background mysteries.
Yeah, but like I said, Nintendo games and Zelda aren't really story heavy. Like, I'm not really sure why you take the story and lore of Zelda so seriously. I mean, it is interesting from time to time, but it's not like the main selling point of a Zelda game, you know? It's not make or break, but it sounds like that's make or break for him in terms of Zelda games. Like, if it doesn't have a good story, he doesn't like it. Like, I don't know, if you want a good story, go play like a PlayStation game or something.
And I think that's what George R. R. Martin is going for as well. But yeah, that was incredibly disappointing, and it kills that sense of wonder, that sense of exploration, because now you're not revealing lore. You know everything. You're just revealing this past narrative of what happened to one of your friend when she got sent back in time, you know? And you're not exploring anymore. Even though it's a huge 3 worlds, you're not exploring. You're just doing tasks for the sake of doing tasks. You're going from place to the place for sake of going to place because you feel like you have to. It feels like work.
You could literally describe every video game ever made like that. Oh yeah, Doom, you have to like just shoot demons all the time. Oh yeah, Skyrim, you just wander from place to place doing stuff. Like yeah, that's kind of the point of a video game, is you're supposed to do stuff and it's supposed to be fun. And in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, all the stuff you do, all that exploration doesn't really reveal lore for the most part. There's very few side quests that reveal lore. Most of that is in the main quest. And with these games, the main quest kind of takes a back seat compared to all the side content there is, because of how massive the world is. Much like Skyrim, and even the original NES Zelda. A lot of what he says could easily be turned around and say, well, Breath of the Wild also did that, because Tears of the Kingdom, like I said, is just a better version of Breath of the Wild, which, in my opinion, is all it needed to be. That's all I wanted from a Breath of the Wild sequel, personally, anyway.
It feels like you're doing homework. It's like, okay, they assign me to go do this. I go do this. They want me to go here. I go here. Oh, look, there's a light in the distance. I guess I gotta go to that. Well, in Breath of the Wild, you had this real sense of adventure, this real sense of, oh my god, what's around the bend? What's behind that mountain? What's that in the horizon? What's this? What's that? And you just don't get that in this game. And even with 3 Overworld, they don't manage to capture that. And quite frankly, it's very disappointing.
No, if anything, they captured it even more in Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah, it kind of sucks they reuse the same map and the same system, so all of it isn't really a surprise like it was in Breath of the Wild, and like I said, the novelty of an open-world Zelda wore off. But that sense of adventure and exploration is still there in Tears of the Kingdom. Every corner, every nook and cranny of the world, 3 worlds mind you, have something there for you to find. Well, except maybe the depths. The depths are kind of empty. Maybe I could talk about that later, I don't know, maybe in another video, but the depths, yeah, not really that great. But then again, even in the depths, like you find all these chests and you think, wow, what's gonna be in here? You fight a boss and you think, what am I gonna get from fighting this boss? And it could be like some Zonai crystals, or it could be a cool piece of clothing that's from the legacy of Zelda. Like, there's still some cool things in the depths, even though I have my criticisms with it.
Speaking of the train of Zonai, all this Zonai tech and all of these new mechanics, there's too much. There's too much. Breath of the Wild had the perfect volume of new mechanics for you to be able to master them and explore them and really get familiar with them. I want to say, like, approaching the, like, 75% point of Tears of the Kingdom. I feel like I'm very far from mastering all of the new mechanics and all of the new technology. There's so many of these devices to play with and explore, and a lot of people see that as a pro, and I get that. I get the logic of that. It just doesn't work for me.
Excuse me, what?
It's too much. What, are the mechanics too complex for you? I don't understand. How is it too much? You said in Breath of the Wild you could master the mechanics and you can't in Tears of the Kingdom? Isn't that a good thing? There's a lot of games that I've beaten but never fully mastered the mechanics because some of them are too complex, like Doom Eternal for example. I've beaten that game several times and I still haven't mastered the mechanics, and that just makes me want to keep playing it even more, so wouldn't you feel the same way about Tears of the Kingdom? I don't really understand what you're saying here. He makes it sound like there's too many mechanics in Tears of the Kingdom, which there really isn't, and it's not like there are any useless mechanics in the game. I just think it's too complex for him to handle or something.
I'm not comfortable with them. A lot of people love this creativity and exploration. I definitely admire that, and I definitely love seeing what people put together with this new technology in the game. But to me, I just don't have that brain. I just don't have the type of brain that has the patience and the desire to explore with technology like that in the game.
If you don't want to, you don't have to build stuff in Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not a super creative person when it comes to that sort of thing in games, but I still at least tried and would mostly just use it to traverse the map better. But you don't have to build things if you don't want to. You can just traverse the map like you would in Breath of the Wild if you don't want to build things.
For me, the game is about adventure and exploration, and it doesn't, that's what these games should be. And that's what a Zelda game should be. And instead, Tears of the Kingdom just makes it about, like Lego building.
Not necessarily. Like I said, you don't have to build things if you don't want to. And the building is there so you can explore the map in different ways. You're making it sound like all you do is build things, but really that's just supplementary to what you do in the game.
and testing out new gadgets. And that's an adventure in itself, and that is exploration in itself. It just isn't the kind I value. And I think that about wraps up my problems with the game. The dungeon issues still aren't fixed. The bosses reappearing in the overworld multiple times takes away their appeal and allure and the weight of them in the story. If they're causing this huge issue where they're present in the main narrative, why are they not causing an issue where they're present in the overworld?
Well, the main boss fights you can only repeat in the depths. They don't really show up in the overworld. So I guess you could make an argument that they only affect the overworld if they're present there. Plus, Nintendo and the developers of Zelda games have made it very clear that they care more about gameplay over story. That's why the Zelda timeline is so convoluted, because they just make it up as they go because they care more about gameplay over story.
Just as random enemies. It makes no sense. Characters are still great, visuals are still great, music's still great. There's so much to love here. It's just not doing it for me. And I've been having so much fun replaying Breath of the Wild, and I think I want to try to go for 100% file. I think that's my goal, because I can play that game over and over again forever. And I will never get tired, and there's always something new to see. And Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time, and one of my favorite pieces of media of all time, and Tears of the Kingdom just quite frankly can't hold a candle. And that's my incredibly hot, savage takes. So hope you guys got something out of this.
Alright, and that's the end of the video. So overall, I guess Tears of the Kingdom is bad because the story isn't great and because the mechanics are too overwhelming or something. I don't know. Not really a great argument for why Tears of the Kingdom sucks. And yeah, that'll about do it for this video, and I guess I'll see you next time.